Hello and welcome to the Grove Church Podcast. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and we are so glad that you're joining us. Whether you are a member and you're just catching up on a sermon that you missed, or you're someone who's brand new, we are really glad that you are joining us. And if you are new in some way, and I know that a lot of people will do that, will listen to sermons first before they visit, I want you to know that we would love to meet you at any point. You can join us live in our services on Sunday, 9 and 10:30, or our streaming service at 10:30. Either way, we would love to be able to get to know you. And regardless of why you are here listening to this sermon today, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, good morning, guys. My name is Brad Alexander. I'm a member here at the Grove, and I get the pleasure of walking through God's Word with us together. I'm married. My wife Melanie and I have been married for 20 years this year. We've got 3 boys, 17, 15, and 12. I have a growing family. I'm originally from Springdale. I'm a Northwest Arkansas guy, born and bred. Springdale Bulldogs, 1999. Let's go. Yeah. And then after high school, I was in Conway in college, and then lived there and did some ministry stuff for a while. My wife is from Memphis. She's not from here, but we met in college through ministry, but then ended up in North Texas, in Allen, Texas, for about 11 years or so, and working in church, doing things down there. In that time, though, when I moved to Texas, I remember walking into that environment and living there and being talking about sports stuff, right, with other people. And in my head, I'm like, Texas is the worst, right? Because when I was growing up, it was basically Arkansas was in a conference with every other school was a Texas school. It was basically us in Texas, right? And so there's this chip on my shoulder. I mean, I'm not that kind of guy externally, but internally, all right, yeah, it's, and I'm kind of cracking jokes about it with people, and they're just not getting it. And I realized this isn't as big a deal to them as it is to me, and which is a little bit embarrassing. But on the flip side, my kids were raised there, and even though in the fall when sports would come on, football come on, I would watch the Razorbacks. The kids who were interested in that, they'd watch it with me. Hey, yeah, we're Razorback fans from a football standpoint. My wife, side note, she hates Arkansas Razorback men's basketball. She's from Memphis, and kind of Memphis basketball is her thing. You can ask her about that later. But anyway, so it's just kind of sometimes a dynamic of basketball seasons around in our home. But our kids, oh yeah, they're watching both teams. But Arkansas, yeah, this is who we are. This is who they are. This is what they do. We moved back here about 5 years ago, kind of reintegrating with the Northwest Arkansas culture. And at some point in that, I decided to take my boys to a Razorback football game. Hey, let's go. So we go, and we're getting there, and then everybody's getting ramped up. They're about to go do kickoff, and hey, let's stand up and call those Hogs. And they'd seen it on TV, and I'm kind of doing it in the home a little bit, but when you're in that stadium and there's thousands of people doing that, and you're oh my gosh, and they're kind of into it and getting excited about it, and it's I didn't realize this is what we did, they're coming to this realization of, as a fan, that's part of, and everybody else is doing that. This awakening to what that reality was. And even driving around, why are there so many chicken trucks? Why is everything called Razorback this or the Razorback that? Why do they spell hog with the W? Why is everything Ozark? What is that, right? Ozark everything. And if you're just here and it's just normal, you don't even see it, right? But you come in as a transplant. They hadn't grown up here, they hadn't seen this stuff. And they're what is good? They're just different, right? There's a way of being up in this area of the state, or just in the state in general, but up here that they just had never been around. And they're kind of waking up to their new reality of life and what it means to live here, and be a part of the community. And with that, there's this parallel, as loose as it is, of going into this 10 commandments we've been walking through in the book of Exodus, where Israel has been enslaved by Egypt. They've had these miraculous moments of being delivered from that through the parting in the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army being conquered and all the plagues and all that kind of stuff. And now they're here at the bottom of this mountain, Mount Sinai, and God's kind of all right, millions of people here. You are my people. Here's what it looks like to relate to me. Here's what it looks like to be my people. Here's what the mode of operation. Here's what's distinct, how we work, how we talk, what we do. These things are being set up, and they're learning, in a sense, and seeing for the first time what it really means that we are God's and He is our God, and this is what it's like for us to be His people. And so in this transition point we're in right now, we've been in this series for about 5 weeks already. And up to this point, the commandments we've been talking to have basically been very vertical, okay? You shall have no other gods before me. That's okay. You don't need to have any idols. Don't craft an image of a god and worship it. That's about God. You need to honor my Sabbath, keep it holy. Okay, that's about trusting in God in that relationship. You need to even honor your parents in that way. Don't take my name in vain. I know parents doesn't say, I'll explain that in a second. But there's these vertical relationships that God's saying, hey, this is what this is about, right? Up and down right here. And this switch we're flipping this week really gets into this horizontal nature, the side by side. It shifts from purely, God and then the parent relationship, but also, hey, this is what it's like just to live and represent me in a community, in a society, how you need to be. And within all that, he's basically trying to say and reiterate, hey, you are my people. Here's how we relate. Charlie walked us through last week the idea of honoring your parents. And even within that, yes, it's a horizontal relationship. It's people to people. But even in that, it's a vertical nature to it. They're like, whether we love our parents, hate our parents, have wounds from our parents, we had the best parents in the world, they give us life. The reason we are here is because our parents created us. We can't just make ourselves appear into existence. We owe that to them. And so there's that reality that God is the creator over all things. And then even this procreation aspect of, there's an honor to give to your parents at some level. The fact that you were living and breathing here today that should be considered. But now we get into this horizontal aspect. And the transition in that is, these are the things I think when you think about the 10 Commandments that if somebody were to say, hey, you ever read the 10 Commandments? Could you quote me a 10 Commandment? We probably can't get them all off, right? Rattle them off. But the ones that we're going to talk through over the next 5 weeks, they're probably the ones that if you were going to name one, you'd probably come up with it. Yeah, don't murder. Hey, don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't lie. I don't know if anybody uses covet on a daily basis, but that's one of them. Don't covet. Like these things that are just they're very clear, do not do this. We can rattle off pretty quickly. And what's interesting about them, there's not a lot of nuance to these. They're very subtle, or they're just straightforward. Hey, don't do this. If we were to look at all of the 10 Commandments, the first 5 that we look through that have to do with relating to God and not worshiping idols and the Sabbath and taking his name in vain, and even the parent side of it, there's a lot of verses that kind of explain it, qualify it, give more meat to it. And then literally it's like verse 13, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, servant, female servant, male servant, ox, donkey, anything that is your neighbor's. And so here in just a little bit, we're going to narrow in for a little time on adultery. But before we do, just look at this list. Think about this list and how horizontal that it is. Every one of these, they're 100% connected to your relationships, the people around you. If you were to stretch out your hands either side by side or behind you where you're sitting right now, you're going to touch somebody, reach somebody. That's the dynamic in which this stuff overlaps. They show up at work. They show up in marriage, in war, in arguments, in the day-to-day reality of just humans being human and living next to each other. And so God is in this place right now, again, in the book of Exodus. This is like several thousand years ago. And Israel is just coming into being its own nation and his people. And he's telling them, hey, you're mine. Like, not like you're mine, but like, you're mine. This is awesome. This is beautiful. This is glorious. I am your God. You are my people. And you're different. This is how to function. This is how to treat each other. This is how to flourish. This is how to see good things come out of this mess of life. This is how life is to be lived and how my people are to act and what they look like and how the relationships show up. But now, for a lot of us reading this today, even you showing up, if you haven't been here for a few weeks, you're like, oh, great, cool, 10 Commandments. Yawn. Oh, I've heard these before. Yeah, the 10 Commandments. My grandma has that hanging up in her closet over the kitchen table, or we have a placard, there's a poster, there's a postcard, it's sewn onto a pillow, right? It's just familiar. It's in there. It's like they're so ingrained into our history as just a culture and a nation and all that kind of weird mess that gets in there, that they're just kind of part of the vernacular, almost like Star Wars is just common language in a knowledge base, or Back to the Future might be, right? And so when we get that, we begin to just weave them into things as familiar, and they kind of lose their reverence a little bit, right? My son is 7. My oldest son's 17. His name's Luke. You know how many times I've told him, Luke, I'm your father. Haha, right? Sweet dad joke. It's great. It's not why we named him that, but it sure is handy, right? But in that moment of that story, this is this like, what? Like revelation moment that's powerful. He's terrified. No, right? But now it's like, ha, 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 ha. It's just a joke, right? And the 10 Commandments can kind of become that, especially these 5 that we're going to switch into. Like, and I'm not downplaying what this is pointing to, but it's even the example I'm going to give is like, you've seen a billboard, something like, thou shalt not text and drive, right? We're just weaving in the 10 Commandments to some other directive. And so when we do that, I'm not saying you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, but when we do that as a culture, it just shows that we're familiar with it. And it's just kind of, yeah, okay, I got it. And it doesn't land the way it's supposed to land anymore because it's just so normal. It's just around. My family and I went to Universal Studios a few weeks ago on vacation. We drove to Orlando. I don't know if you ever made that drive, but it's not short. We went, not complaining. We had a great vacation. If you ever heard Charlie talk about theme parks, he likes to say, man, my family wins at theme parks. I think my family tries to survive at theme parks. We're just like, all right, okay. We paid money to be here. We got to do all of it. But we're not like, come on, let's go, right? And so, but while we're there, I lost count of how many and what instances, but there was at least 3 or 4 different rides that we rode that were awesome, tons of fun. But at some point, they had a glitch, or they got paused, or they kind of stopped somewhere where they weren't supposed to stop for a while, and then they went on, right? And so these rides are all set up, no matter what they are, with some sort of story, right? Hey, everything's fine. Then something goes wrong, right? And so now you're, on the roller coaster and the Raptors are chasing you, or you're in whatever, and this is bad things about to happen. That's how they're designed to set up. That's why they're fun. But when we're in these breaking points, side note, there's a really fun story about the Fast and Furious ride. If you want to hear it, come talk to me afterwards. I can't tell it now, but it was hilarious. But you're in these rides and you get stuck for a second and you're kind of like, that's how they do that. Oh, this screen goes all the way around. And then the truck moves. We're not really moving. I didn't realize that. Or man, we're sitting here and this animatronic bird just keeps saying the same thing over and over again for 3 minutes, right? And you're kind of like, okay. I didn't realize that's how it worked. When you're in that moment and you start to notice the things that you don't normally pay attention to, for me at least, there was some humor in it, but there's also just an appreciation. Man, the people who design these things are freaking smart. There's a lot of technology and coordination that goes into this to fool me into thinking whatever's going on is going on. I'm like, man, that's pretty cool. And so we've been riding this ride in church and in our culture for so long that I think some of these things, especially these next 5 commandments, we just don't even see anymore because they're just kind of there. It's like we don't see them for what life looks like if these weren't even in normal practice in day-to-day society. Okay, like we just assume they're always around. Like, can you imagine? Okay, let's say you move to a new city. You're in your neighborhood, pull up in your U-Haul, and you start unloading. You got the hand trucks. You're pulling boxes off. You're trying to finagle the furniture into, everything kind of goes in the garage first before you bring in the house. And so just, up and down the ramp, box after box, we're laying them up. Here's the kitchen stuff. Here's the living room stuff. And all of a sudden, every once in a while, you start noticing that like the piles are getting smaller. And then you look up and there's like 3 or 4 people from your neighborhood just walking in and taking stuff and running away. And then they come back and they do it again. And you're like, hey, you're stealing my stuff. No, I'm not. I didn't do anything. You didn't see me. You're like, what is going on? And you're kind of frustrated with that. And then, you get online to like complain on the Facebook group for the neighborhood. And then somehow you discover in the middle of that Facebook, like 3/4 of the neighborhood is all like sleeping with each other and cheating on their spouses with each other. You're like, what in the world is going on? And then you're like outside doing that, and you see all these people kind of sneering over their fence or like standing out in their front lawn, like sizing up your stuff. And you can tell they have this like thirst in their eyes. Like, man, I want that car. I wish I had that, whatever. And then once a month, a fight breaks out and people just get killed. And then the kicker, you like bring it up and like no one thinks it's wrong. They're just like, this is just how it is. This is great. This is how we work. You're like, what in the world where am I? God brings his people out of this slavery environment in Egypt. He's setting them up in this insanely tribal, power-driven, hard cultures around them. And he's saying, hey, you're mine. And this is how we operate. And almost to a T, all of these things he says, don't do this, were normal practices in some fashion, in some way, in the cultures around them. It was radically different than the way that everybody just normally lived. We don't see that, obviously, because we kind of take it for granted because, yeah, of course it's bad to murder and to do this. But like, and there's places in the world today where they still don't think it's a big a deal for a lot of these things. But when we can't see that, it's hard to realize that, man, God's saying, hey, you are my people. You will be different. I'm a God of life. I'm a God of protection. I'm a God of light and flourishing. In these commands, we see the sanctity of the home, the sanctity of life, the sanctity of marriage, the sanctity of friendship and community and trust and thriving. Yet, I can't get past the fact that he has to spell them out. Like he has to say, don't lie. Don't kill people. Even though all of these are a better way, a better life, and are a foundation for a robust, thriving, interconnected community, it's not obvious. They still have to be named and spelled out. Again, like I said, my wife and I have 3 boys, and they're all in like, kind of high teens to beginning teens age. So we're not done yet, but man, we got some stories, right? We could share some things that are just hilarious about parenting. Not in too long of a recent past, probably sooner than you would expect. There's several things that I remember we've had to sort of command that I just thought would be obvious. Hey, we don't lick the couch. Just not something we do here. We don't lick the couch. Hey, that remote control is not something that you just chew on. Not what we do. I don't know if you know that. Hey, by the way, if you empty the milk jug, you don't really need to put it in the fridge. Like that can just be going into the trash. God commands these things for our relationships with each other, people to go well, to be well, to honor him, to show honor and value to the people around us. But like children who need parenting, they're not obvious to human nature. We don't gravitate towards being honest. We gravitate towards kind of covering our backstory. We don't gravitate towards showing forgiveness when we're angry. We gravitate towards the vengeance and the pain that we want somebody else to experience. It's not natural for us to celebrate, oh, sweet, look at them going to the beach again for the 4th time this year. Must be nice. I've been on this staycation for 3 years because we're in a financial mess. That's not where we don't gravitate towards that. But these things are godly. They're supernatural. They're beautiful, and they're good. But they aren't obvious, and they aren't natural to us. Spring break, 1992. I'm 11 years old. I'm a kid of the late 80s, early 90s. And so, my parents might be home. I don't know. We're hanging out at a friend's house down the street. This kid was 2 years older than me. And he's the kid I got in a lot of trouble with, broke bikes, ramped things and hurt things and explored creeks and blew up firecrackers in places we probably shouldn't. Just all that good boy stuff. It was a lot of fun. And he lived next door to another family who had a kid that was the same age as him. And we were all hanging out one day, the spring break. And it's kind of this, it's March. And so, winter's on its way out, but spring's not all the way there. But nobody's like raked all the leaves yet, right? So that you're just kind of in that weird mode. The trees are still kind of dead, whatever. And so anyway, we're hanging out, and me and friend A are hanging out. Then friend B comes over, and we're hanging out. And then friend B has an older brother who's in high school. And he comes out and said, "Hey, you guys want to see something cool?" And we're like, "Of course." So he comes over and he's got this lighter and he lights some leaves on fire and he has a can of WD-40 and he goes, shh. He goes, whoosh. We're like, whoa! That's obviously the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, right? Should I do it again? Yeah. All right. Whoosh. Whoa, this is amazing, right? But it's a little scary because, you can feel the heat from it. And he comes over, let's do it over here too. There's a bigger pile. We'll make it. He kind of lights several of them. And at this point, I'm getting a little scared. But stamp it all out. He's like, let's do another one. And then he lights another one on fire, and the wind picks up. And all of a sudden, this row of leaves on his fence, we're talking 30 feet of leaves, just starts going. And there's a fence line between the two houses. It goes probably about 100 feet down towards the creek below it, and it catches. And there's trees, and they're blowing in the wind, and it's just fanning the flames. So 11-year-old Brad and friend A run into friend A's house. Again, I don't know where the parents are. They're at work or something. We're calling 911. Fire guys, men show up. They take care of it. Thank God, no. The fence got damaged, but nothing else caught. I think another guy ran and got a hose before they showed up. But, man, it was I was shaky, am I going to get in trouble? All the things, right? Something that was a little fun, a little exciting, kind of dangerous. Man, it just progressed. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, man, there's some damage. There's some damage being done. And now we're scared, and now we're worried. Exodus 20, verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. It's 5 words. Pretty straightforward. Seems simple enough. But for thousands of years, for people maybe some of us in this room, it's gotten out of hand. And damage has been done. And there's possibly some scars and things that are still there. Out of all these 5 in this transition point, I feel like adultery, there's just kind of this general gut reaction to it. Everybody kind of feels a certain way about it. There's a lot of different ways that we feel, but 2 reactions that I've noticed over time of dealing with it or talking with people about it or whatever is, one, there's this immediate wash of just shame. Or 2, there's kind of a roll of my eyes, whatever, surprise, surprise, the church people are talking about my sex life. You just kind of tune it off. The shame and the wash of that often gets derived from or misconstrued or whatever you want to say from the initial conviction of things that have happened. Conviction, sorrow, repentance. I want to turn from that. This is not right. That is all of God. But this extra layer of you are now gross, you are now disgusting, you are now basically a leper of society. You've committed the evilest of all evils, and there's no redemption for you. That is the enemy whispering and continuing to push us out of a relationship with God. You are no more evil or bad than anyone else on the planet, if that's a part of your story. Does it justify things? No. But this wash of shame is not where God has anybody to live and stay. The second side of it, the scoffing at God, kind of whatever. If somebody else hurt you with some application of the word, maybe overriding on purity culture, and you just heard it every week, and it's the worst thing ever, so you're just like, man, I'm over it. I can't hear that anymore. It's not helping you to resist that. It's not helping you to stay there. And I'm saying this to myself, just as anybody else. And frankly, it's just arrogant. And it's prideful. And it's keeping you from trusting God with the things of your heart, and keeping you from trusting other people to let them in. Adultery is one of those things that it has a unique rift that it creates, but it's also been kind of, I was telling somebody earlier, like, I don't know you can sit here and talk for 35 minutes just about adultery. I'm sure you could, but it's what it is. And what is it? It's a break in a marriage relationship. There's one spouse has sex with somebody outside the marriage and trust is broken. That's the dry definition, but it's uniquely tied to this husband and wife relationship. It's not just sexual immorality. It's not whatever. Those might be outplays of lust that lead into an adulterous something, but there's a broken rift in that relationship between a husband and a wife. It's not a boyfriend-girlfriend thing. It's not they just got cheated on thing with somebody that you're not committed to. It is a very definitive thing against and an attack and a damage in that relationship. And the reason is, when with marriage, there's a commitment. There's a trust. There's this in it together for life agreement that both people have stepped in and willfully looked in each other's eyes and stood before God and said, we're in this together. And then for whatever reasons, whatever comes up, there's a wedge that is, and a chisel that has damaged that and cracked. It's not a flippant puppy love relationship in junior high. This is a break in trust. There's a level of deception. There's lying. There's covering up. There might be some manipulation. But there's hurt, and it's so painful because of that commitment. And there's betrayal that's experienced by the one person that you've, again, looked in the eyes and said, I'm in this with you. It's not just like a letdown. Like it's a wound. And so in adultery, it lands differently. It's not a victimless sin. It's not something that nobody's affected. Like it breaks a marriage. It can lead to divorce, and it affects the kids that might be involved in the household, and it ripples out to friends and grandparents and parents and causes you to, man, what am I? Am I ever to be trusted again? And it raises questions of, well, what else is going on that we didn't know? It's just this ripple of this effect. And so later, when people talk about adultery, a lot of times they'll reference the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus expands on it, says, you've heard that it was said to not commit adultery, but I tell you to look at a woman with lust in your eyes. You've already committed adultery with you in her heart. And that's been kind of winnowed out and specified to like, don't look at porn or something. But I'm not saying like you should. But like the reason he takes it there is that there's an objectification of happening of other people, that you take them for granted, you use them for your own good, and you dismiss this commitment. And in a sense, kind of push it off or walk away from it. And that's a big deal because God's like, that is not good for you. It's not good for them. You know, I'm old enough at this point that I've seen this happen to friends. I've seen it happen to coworkers. I've seen it happen to those people I never thought it would happen to. And it's incredibly sobering, and it breaks my heart. But from this, like, okay, yeah, don't commit adultery. Okay, I got it. But then, like, what do we do with this? How can we take some steps to take action in this, whatever it is? And the first thing that I would say is we got to all own up to the fact that nobody on this planet is above it. Just because somebody else did it doesn't mean that you're not capable of it. When we are alone, far from God, continue to walk away from community, out of trust, we got crap that we're dealing with that we're not, whatever, we can all find ourselves just as capable of that as anybody else. So we got to be honest with that before God. We're not better than anybody. The second thing is, if you are married, fight for your marriage. Protect your marriage. And if you guys are like this right now, talk to somebody about that. Get some help to get through that, because this that God's put together is beautiful, and it's hard, but it's good. And it's better. If your parents, you were not married to your children. The children are awesome, but you were not married to them. You were married to your spouse. Fight for that. Protect it. If you're single, And you, first off, if you're single and you look to be married, man, people don't just all of a sudden become trustworthy and dependable and honest and vulnerable and committed once you just say, I do. Like, that's something God works in us, that Jesus forms in us over time as we follow him and work with him and grow in him and live life with him. So pay attention to that. Well, the flip side, if you got married friends, help them protect their marriage. Help them fight for it. Ask them, love on them, be with them. The last thing I'll say in this is, there's not an end to a story if this has happened to you or if your friends or whoever it's happened to. It's not like, oh, great, let's write them off. Now I'm out. You have not committed the one sin that God can't redeem. If Jesus did not die on the cross and raised from the dead to bring hope and healing and redemption to this, I don't know what he would have. You were not outside the bounds of God's grace. You were right swept in the middle of it. But just like he said to the woman who was caught in adultery that came and the guys tried to condemn her and stone her, and he said he got out of that mess, but he looked at her and he didn't say, hey, it's okay, you're fine. He said, you're not condemned, but go and sin no more. In Romans, Paul tells us there's now therefore no condemnation for anyone who is in Christ Jesus. There's not an asterisk except for the people who committed adultery. That's not there. That includes anybody. But we've got to turn from it, walk in it, and obviously trust him. But the grace and the mercy and the absolute phenomenal power of the fact that Jesus hung on the cross, took our shame, rose from the dead, rose victoriously, gives anybody in adultery the hope that there is a second chapter to that your story's not done. And anybody else who is wrestling with things that are similar to that or that you are capable of, that God has not washed you out of his laundry. You are a part of his grace and still in his church, and trust him with that and lean into him and seek it out and get the restoration and go forward with it and let him redeem it. And that is beautiful too. But we got to walk with him and trust him and live into that betterness that he has for us and hope we have in him. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for life that comes in you. When we sit here before you as a people and just admit that we are not beyond temptation, we are not beyond sin. And I pray that will sober us in a good way and bring us to you to love and to follow and to enjoy our relationship with you and see the goodness and flourishing that comes when we live in a way that you've set up, because it's just good and it's beautiful and it's hard, but it's worth it. I pray we would be a community to each other, to be people we can trust and talk to in the middle of this stuff. But God, may we know that you are for us and you are with us. You have redeemed us and are continuing to do so now and tomorrow and the next day. And thank you for the hope that we have and the power of you. I pray we would rest and hug that and hold on to it. Amen.
Thanks again for joining us on our sermon podcast, and you can learn more about us at thegrovechurch.org. And if you go to thegrovechurch.org/connect, there's a form you could fill out. Just let us know that you've been listening. And if you want to dig deeper on some of these topics that we cover in our sermon podcast, or just in other issues of dealing with culture or theology, those kinds of things, you can check out our Cultivate podcast, which is on the same feed, however you found this particular podcast. So again, this is Charlie, the lead pastor at The Grove, and thank you so much for joining us.